They had drugged him and beaten him.
They stabbed him 18 to 30 times, drug him up and down the power lines.
On October 9th, 1983, Timothy Coggan's life was brutally cut short, and the horrors left in the wake of his murder would haunt Georgia for over 30 years.
His pants, his underwear, his blue jeans, covered in mud and blood, ripped to his knees. His shoes missing, and undershirt missing.
Despite initial leads, Timothy's case went cold, buried by a sinister web of racism, corruption, and secrets. Hello and welcome back. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell. Your support helps us continue sharing these important stories and keep the memory of victims like Timothy Coggan's alive. Let's get started. October 9th, 1983 was a cool autumn Sunday in Spalding County, Georgia. A group of squirrel hunters set out early, hoping for a quiet day in the open fields just north of Griffin. But what they found was far from peaceful. Beneath a large oak tree, ominously known as the hanging tree, lay the brutally beaten body of a young black man. His face and body were so disfigured that he was unrecognizable. The authorities were immediately contacted. When deputies of the Spalding County Sheriff's Department arrived, they found a hell-on-earth crime scene. The young man was stripped of his shirt, his pants, and underwear pulled down to his knees. Investigators observed multiple bruises and cuts covering his body, and most disturbingly, a large X was carved into his abdomen, a macabre signature. Investigators noted tire tracks crisscrossing the ground, forming a crude pattern in the dirt. Near the tracks was a bloodied sweater, turned inside out and discarded like trash. Police believe the victim had been dragged behind a vehicle, his body bouncing across the rough terrain before being abandoned, left to die beneath the hanging tree. No murder weapon was found at the scene. However, a series of ominous items lay nearby. An empty Jack Daniel's whiskey bottle, a wooden table leg wrapped in black insulation tape, and various patches of blood scattered around the field. These items and sand samples were gathered as evidence. The body was sent to coroner's office to identify the victim and cause of death. The autopsy confirmed the horrifying details. The victim was stabbed multiple times. One specific wound behind his knee intended to sever his tendons and disable him. His skull was crushed. His head was severely battered with a blunt object, most likely the table leg found at the scene. 2 large X marks carved into his abdomen and back, meant to symbolize the Confederate flag, a twisted mark of hatred. The victim died approximately 36 hours before his body was found, likely on Friday, October 7th, 1983. His cause of death wasn't a single fatal injury, it was fatal blood loss. The victim's face had been so badly beaten that identification seemed impossible. He was estimated to be in his early to mid-20s, around 5 feet 7 inches tall, with one small identifying mark, a tattoo on his hand. No match to all missing persons reports. The Sheriff's Department enlisted Patrolman Oscar Jordan, one of the few black officers in Spalding County. With racial tensions running high and distrust between the black community and the predominantly white police force, they believed Jordan could bridge the divide. His mission was clear: connect with the black community, gain their trust, and find someone who might identify the victim. For 2 long days, Jordan went door to door, armed with autopsy photos of the disfigured man. Most people couldn't bear to look at the battered face, let alone recognize it. Jordan had almost given up hope when he knocked on the door of the Coggans family home in Griffin, Georgia. A young woman named Talisa Coggans answered. At first, she didn't recognize the victim, but when she noticed the small tattoo on his hand, a sudden realization hit her like a punch to the chest. It was her older brother, 23-year-old Timothy Coggans. Timothy Wayne Coggans was born on October 29, 1960, in the city of Griffin, Georgia. He was the 4th child in a bustling family of 8 siblings, raised by his devoted mother Viola and his stepfather, Robert Dorsey. Timothy was known for his charismatic personality. People were naturally drawn to his bright smile and easygoing charm. In Griffin, he was something of a local favorite. Timothy worked various jobs as a handyman, and he was always ready to help. He especially adored his younger sister, Talisa, and the two shared a close bond. Timothy always watched out for Talisa and kept her grounded. Timothy loved to socialize, often attending local parties and gatherings where he'd be seen dancing and laughing with friends. But this friendly personality came with its own set of risks, especially in Spalding County. Spalding County, situated in the heart of west-central Georgia, known for its picturesque landscapes of rolling hills, serene lakes, and small-town charm. But in the early 1980s, the county was marked by racial divides and societal tension. During this time, Black residents faced prejudice and discrimination in ways that were often overt and sometimes painfully subtle. It wasn't unusual for the Ku Klux Klan to hold rallies or marches where they would flaunt their symbols and uniforms. The Hanging Tree, a massive oak that stood in a remote field, was a landmark with a dark past where gatherings and even lynchings had taken place in generations gone by. In Spalding County, even friendships could lead to danger, especially for Timothy, who was unafraid to socialize with people of different races.
He was not following the rules of 1983, if you will. And if you were a Klan member or a racist, any of those things would infuriate you and anger you to the point where Timothy Coggins became a target.
With Timothy's identity confirmed, investigators faced a challenging path forward. Officer Jordan began questioning witnesses and gathering statements, piecing together Timothy's last known movements. According to Timothy's sister, Talisa, on Friday, October 7, 1983, the two had gone out to People's Choice, a popular club in Griffin. The club was a hotspot for the young Black crowd, complete with a fully stocked bar and barbecue. Timothy wasn't just a regular at the club, he even did odd jobs for the owner, his longtime friend. But in recent weeks, Timothy was seen dancing with a young white woman in the club. Friends warned him to be cautious, but Timothy brushed it off, saying, "There's no way a white man would enter the club."
And so I told him, I said, "Tell him, be careful." And then all of a sudden, I see 3 white guys standing in front of the club. And as a police officer, things like that seem strange to you, because Caucasians did not visit that club.
Timothy's bravado would soon prove dangerously naive. That Friday night, in the club's bathroom, Talisa overheard whispers that some white men were waiting outside for Timothy. She saw him leave the club, walk toward the parking lot with them. It was the last time she would ever see him alive. Jordan pressed Talisa why no one had reported Timothy missing sooner. She explained that her brother had a habit of disappearing for a few days after weekends. Timothy knew everyone in town, and the family assumed he was safe, just staying over at someone's house. It wasn't until 2 days later, when officers asked about a murder victim, that they realized something was terribly wrong. Jordan and the sheriff's officers interviewed more witnesses from the club. Their accounts aligned with Talisa's story, but no one knew who the white men were or where they had gone after that night. Months passed following Timothy's murder, but Officer Oscar Jordan remained dedicated to the case. He began hearing whispers of a possible motive. According to some leads, Timothy had taken $600 from some white men in exchange for marijuana, but never delivered the drugs. These men were possibly after him. Then, Jordan received a promising tip that led him to Carey's mobile home park in Sunnyside, not far from where Timothy's body was found. The tipster overheard a man bragging about Timothy Coggins' murder. At the trailer park, Jordan met Sandra Bunn, a reluctant witness. She recalled seeing Timothy with 3 others, her brother, Frankie Gebhardt, Frankie's girlfriend, Mickey Guy, and Frankie's brother-in-law, Bill Moore Sr. Sandra claimed that all 4 climbed into a pickup truck and drove in the direction of the Hanging Tree. Jordan was about to have a breakthrough until the case was taken away. Without warning, Jordan was removed from the investigation and sent back to his regular patrol duties. A new team was brought in to handle Timothy Coggins' murder. One of the first moves by the new team was to bring Frankie Gebhardt in for questioning. Using the information Jordan had painstakingly collected, they pressed Gebhardt about his whereabouts on the night of Timothy's murder. Frankie claimed to have been with his girlfriend, Mickey Guy, the entire night. When investigators interviewed Mickey, she confirmed Frankie's account. They never set foot inside People's Choice, the predominantly black club, and didn't know Timothy Coggins at all. Despite having multiple witnesses, no one could definitively identify who the white men and woman were. Worse yet, the investigators failed to follow up on Jordan's lead about Bill Moore Sr., a name that had emerged repeatedly in whispers surrounding the case. A search of Gebhardt's trailer yielded nothing. No physical evidence linked him to the brutal crime. Investigators noted that none of the blood evidence collected matched the blood types of Frankie, Mickey, or Bill Moore Sr. In the 1980s, DNA testing was still in its early stages. The lack of clear evidence seemed to push the case into limbo. Despite strong suspicions that critical information was being withheld, the investigation ground to a halt. Timothy Coggins' murder case was quietly closed. Someone knew what had happened to Timothy, but the question was, would anyone come forward? Timothy's life was over, but the death threat upon his family had just begun. It started with an anonymous phone call to Timothy's stepfather, warning that more family members would be killed if they didn't stop seeking justice. Soon after, he found a bloody T-shirt in the school bus he drove, a cruel mockery of the evidence from the crime scene. The threats escalated. One evening, as the family gathered in their living room to watch TV, a brick crashed through their window. Scrawled on the brick were the chilling words, "You're next." The most horrifying incident came when they found a decapitated black dog on their porch, with the same deadly message, "You're next." When Timothy was laid to rest in the Fuller Chapel United Methodist Church Cemetery, the family chose not to mark his grave with a headstone, fearing it might be desecrated. They lived in constant fear, wondering who was behind the harassment, Timothy's killers, or others trying to protect them. As the investigation into Timothy's murder faded into silence, his family was left with deepened pain. The law had failed them. For more than 30 years, they were haunted by fear, wondering if the killers or threateners were still watching. Timothy's mother, Viola Coggins Dorsey, carried a heavy burden of guilt and torment until her passing in February 2016. But in the weeks leading up to her death, Viola made a chilling prophecy to her daughter Talisa. She wouldn't live to see that day, but she was certain someone would bring Timothy's killers to justice.
And even on her dying deathbed, she spoke of Tim's name. And so, she still wanted justice for her son, even on her deathbed 33 years later.
Talisa and her family had abandoned hope of ever finding justice for Timothy. After all these years, no one had contacted them. But in a shocking twist of fate, in July 2017, she received a call that would change everything.
You just feel that you're in a small, racist South Georgia town, and nobody really cares about the justice for your family and what has been done to your loved one.
Did that haunt the family, not having those answers?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It haunted our family until July 26, 2016, when Sheriff Dix called and said, "Hey, I think we're going to reopen Tim's case."
A few months after Timothy's mother's prophecy, the Coggins family finally got the answers they had been denied for so long. In the winter of 2016, nearly 34 years after Timothy's brutal death, a fresh set of eyes took on the case. He was Special Agent Jared Coleman of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. In his second year with the agency, Coleman was tasked with reviewing cold cases, and the unresolved murder of Timothy Coggins immediately caught his attention. As he began reading through the case file, Coleman was struck by the lack of effort in the original investigation. Evidence had been mishandled, suspects had been overlooked, and leads were left unexplored.
My reaction was just absolutely horrified. There were potential suspects who were never interviewed originally back in the 80s.
Determined to right these wrongs, Coleman threw himself into the case. One of the first things he noticed was several interviews with Frankie Gebhardt and Mickey Guy from 1983 were riddled with inconsistencies. Even more disturbing was that the third suspect, Bill Moore Sr., had been completely ignored in the investigation. No follow-ups, no interviews, nothing. In 2007, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation received an unexpected letter from an inmate named Christopher Vaughn, who was serving time on charges of pedo. In his letter, Vaughn made a startling claim. He had crucial information about the unsolved murder of Timothy Coggins. Vaughn revealed that he had been just 10 years old when, along with other squirrel hunters, stumbled upon Timothy's beaten body near the hanging tree in 1983. With Vaughn's letter as a catalyst, Coleman reached out to Daryl Dix, the newly elected sheriff of Spalding County. Sheriff Dix was known for his commitment to change the department. He saw Timothy's case as an opportunity to restore trust between law enforcement and the community.
It was a horrible death. It was a torturous death.
A visit to the crime scene only confirmed what Special Agent Jared Coleman had long suspected. This wasn't just a brutal killing, it was a lynching. Timothy had been tortured, savagely beaten, and left to die in that open field. Meanwhile, Sheriff Daryl Dix requested all original evidence, but Sheriff Dix was appalled to find that most of it had mysteriously vanished. The whiskey bottle, the wooden table leg, the bloody sweatshirt, even the tire track impressions, all were lost. This was no accident. It was a calculated cover-up by the very team assigned to investigate. Unshaken, Sheriff Dix began reviewing cases linked to hate crimes and racial violence from the 1980s. He found a journal dated 1982 belonging to an undercover detective. The journal detailed his efforts to expose the Ku Klux Klan's leadership. The detective eventually gained the Klan's trust, and during one meeting, he was told that several high-ranking officials from the Spalding County Sheriff's Department and the Griffin Police Department were inducted into the Klan. The very people tasked with protecting the public were sabotaging the investigation, hiding behind their badges while protecting their fellow Klansmen. With renewed determination, Coleman and Dix forged ahead with their theories. On April 26, 2017, they prepared to confront a decades-old conspiracy and bring Timothy's killers to justice. Coleman visited Christopher Vaughn in prison. Two names kept surfacing during Vaughn's testimony: Frankie Gebhardt and Bill Moore. Vaughn recounted that, back in 1983, he overheard Gebhardt casually boasting about killing a black man. As the years went by, Gebhardt's dark bragging only intensified. He would often bring up the murder of Timothy Coggins like it was his badge of honor. Gebhardt even admitted to Vaughn that he had destroyed all evidence, burned and tossed it down a well on his property. On the night of Timothy's murder, Vaughn saw Gebhardt, Mickey Guy, and Bill Moore arguing with Timothy. Gebhardt discovered that his then-girlfriend, Mickey, was having an affair, even having sex with Timothy. This revelation struck Coleman and his team. They suspected that Mickey was the very same woman dancing with Timothy at the club. But confirmation was impossible. Mickey had left Georgia just weeks after the murder and had passed away in 2010, taking her secrets to the grave. Despite the setback, the investigators pressed on. They still had two living suspects to question, and they weren't about to let them slip away. The first suspect, Bill Moore Sr., was a tough nut. He adamantly denied knowing Timothy or having any involvement in his death. Coleman could tell that Moore was lying, but they decided not to push too hard at that moment. Instead, they turned their focus on Frankie Gebhardt, who was already in custody at the Spalding County Detention Center on sexual assault charges. When Coleman and his team confronted the 59-year-old Gebhardt, he flatly denied any knowledge of Timothy Coggins or even his murder. Gebhardt dismissed the allegations as lies and claimed never bragged about the killing or disposed of evidence. When Coleman mentioned the well, Gebhardt challenged them to dig it up, daring them to find anything.
The reason we're here, and what we want to talk to you about now, is in 1983, there was a body found in North Pollard County. There's a black guy that's found dead. Off Manor Road. In 83. How many years? That's been 30-something years. It's been a while. And so the guy that's in the picture, you don't know, right? But you said a while ago. No, I don't know it. That's all I know. But why you come up like that with knife and wheel? The guys with my ass around. I'll tell you what people say. Yeah, I ain't trying to wrap my ass around what you're trying to do. I'm telling you what people are saying. I don't care what you say. They're saying that you said that you're denying. I don't care what you say. They also say that you've been killing that guy in that picture in the park. I don't care what you say. But you're not denying it. But you're not denying it. Then why I deny it? I don't know about nobody. I ain't no damn fool. I might be crazy, but I ain't no fool. You tell us that you killed him. You goddamn right.
But when Coleman showed Gibhart a photo of Timothy, he suddenly exploded in a fit of anger, spewing hateful and derogatory language. This reaction told Coleman everything he needed to know. Gibhart had something to hide. Coleman began digging into Frankie Gibhart's past and quickly uncovered a disturbing history. Gibhart had spent his entire life living in or near Carey's mobile home park in Sunnyside, never venturing far from the town that held its dark secrets. He dropped out of school early and became a timber logger. On weekends, he and his brother-in-law, Bill Moore Sr., were notorious for throwing wild parties at the mobile park with drugs and alcohol. The two men were inseparable, infamous for their violent tempers, and often landed in front of a judge. As investigators were closer to the truth, all of a sudden, many people were ready to talk. By July 2017, the case was making headlines once again. In a striking interview with reporters, Sheriff Daryl Dix dropped a chilling warning to Timothy's killers and their accomplices. The law was coming for them.
But the people who did it, they know what it was. The people who committed the crime know how he was killed, and those are the people that we're coming after.
The community began to stir. Over the next few months, between 60 and 70 witnesses came forward, all pointing to the same conclusion: Gibhart and Moore had murdered Timothy Coggins. Although Gibhart purposely told different versions of the story to confuse the investigators, a few witnesses stood out as key to cracking the case. One such witness, William Sadler, was part of the hunting group that discovered Timothy's body near the hanging tree. Sadler claimed that Gibhart had personally confessed to the murder, and he had reported this confession to law enforcement back in 1983. Shockingly, nothing was done. Another one, Shirley Sisk, was a friend of Bill Moore's late wife. Sisk recalled a chilling conversation where the wife confided that Bill Moore had planned to murder a young black man and drag him behind his truck. An ex-girlfriend of Gibhart's detailed the years of abuse she had suffered while dating him. She remembered one time when Gibhart threatened her, saying she would end up just like that black boy in the ditch. Another witness stepped forward with a bone-chilling confession. She claimed that both Gibhart and Moore, in a drunken stupor, openly admitted to the murder, lamenting the good old days when killing black people for no reason was simply a way of life. As the investigation closed in, the backlash was swift and fierce. Family members of the accused men, Frankie Gibhart and Bill Moore Sr., lashed out at the sheriff's department, claiming the arrests were nothing more than a ploy to curry favor with the black community. They insisted that both men were the scapegoats of an unfair system. Among the most vocal was 41-year-old Brandy Abercrombie, Moore's daughter and Gibhart's niece. She asserted that neither she nor her family had ever heard of the Timothy Coggins case before the investigation was reopened. Despite the public outcry, investigators believed they had gathered enough evidence: the confessions, witness testimonies. But in a murder trial, circumstantial evidence alone wouldn't be enough. The prosecution had no physical evidence linking Frankie Gibhart and Bill Moore Sr. to Timothy Coggins' murder, much of it lost or mishandled by the original investigators. That's when Special Agent Jared Coleman recalled Christopher Vaughn's earlier testimony about a well on Gibhart's property. Vaughn claimed Gibhart bragged about disposing of evidence by tossing it into the well. The problem was, excavating the well meant potentially destroying Gibhart's home, a risky and costly operation. However, Coleman found an ally, attorney Marie Broder. After some searching, they managed to locate a hydrovac company in Atlanta. They could clean out wells by blasting water and vacuuming up debris without causing significant damage to the property. It was a long shot, but they were willing to take it.
It took us all day to excavate this well, and we began to find all these great pieces of evidence.
In August 2017, the team initiated the well excavation, hoping to find something that was hidden for decades. They found a trove of discarded trash and, most importantly, critical evidence that had been buried with it. Among the debris was a partially burned size 10 Adidas tennis shoe, similar to what Timothy often wore when going out. Then came a torn white t-shirt with multiple holes in the back, consistent with his stab wounds. It was not all. They discovered a thick chain, which could have been used to drag Timothy behind a vehicle. And the most significant evidence was an old, broken knife, possibly the weapon used in the murder. With this evidence in hand, the prosecution finally had concrete links between the suspects and Timothy's murder. The tides were turning, and the truth was finally here. Before investigators could fully process the crucial evidence from the well, another twist emerged. After their initial interview with Gebhardt in April 2017, investigators placed a wiretap on his prison phone calls, hoping to uncover more information from his private conversations. The results were explosive. Gebhardt frequently called his sister, Sandra Bunn, and in those recorded calls, Sandra was advising him on how to avoid getting caught. She warned her brother not to speak with investigators and not accept any food or drink from them, fearing they might collect DNA from his discarded utensils. This raised red flags, but the real shock came when investigators learned that Sandra's advice was coming from her son, Lamar Bunn, a police officer with the Milner Police Department. But that wasn't the final surprise. Another individual was discovered to be aiding Gebhardt from within law enforcement. Gregory Huffman, a corrections officer at the Spalding County Jail, had been secretly passing information about the investigation to Gebhardt while he was in custody. Huffman's actions allowed Gebhardt to stay one step ahead of the law, feeding him details that could potentially be used to undermine the prosecution's case in court. This revelation was the final blow. The years of cover-ups, deceit, and corruption that protected Timothy Coggan's killers were finally unraveling. In light of this new evidence, authorities moved quickly to make arrests. On October 13, 2017, after 34 years, Frankie Gebhardt and Bill Moore Sr. were arrested and charged with the murder of Timothy Coggins. Alongside them, 3 other individuals, Sandra Bunn, her son Lamar Bunn, and corrections officer Gregory Huffman, were arrested for their roles in obstructing justice. All 5 were held at the Spalding County Detention Center. In mid-January 2018, Gebhardt's trial took center stage. Prosecution attorney Marie Broder opened with a fiery statement, setting the tone for the high-stakes trial.
In this case, you will hear the crime scene where Timothy Coggins was killed scream. You will hear it scream that it was a field off of Minchell Road that became a killing field. You will hear it scream to you of the unspeakable horror that happened to Timothy Coggins. You will hear of over 30 injuries to a 23-year-old man's body. You will hear that he had dirt and the red clay in the ground matted in his hair. Abrasions all over him. His pants, his underwear, his blue jeans, covered in mud and blood, ripped to his knees. His shoes missing, an undershirt missing.
According to the prosecution, on Friday, October 7th, 1983, Timothy and Mickey Guy went to the People's Choice Club. Several people admitted to seeing Timothy with a white woman and confirmed that this wasn't the first time the pair was spotted together. News of their relationship reached Mickey's then-boyfriend, Frankie Gebhardt. That night, Gebhardt and Bill Moore Sr. drove to the club, asking around about Timothy. At some point, Gebhardt entered the club and confronted Timothy and Mickey. Given Timothy's easygoing nature, he likely agreed to go outside and talk. The 4, Timothy, Mickey, Gebhardt, and Moore, then made their way to Carey's mobile home park. The men lured Timothy and Mickey to the open field near the infamous hanging tree, where Timothy's fate was sealed. In a sudden attack, Gebhardt and Moore severed Timothy's tendons to disable him, then savagely stabbed him multiple times in the back. As Timothy lay helpless, they carved 2 large X's into his back and abdomen. The 2 men bludgeoned Timothy with a table leg and chained his body to the back of their pickup truck. They dragged him across the field before abandoning him to die under the hanging tree. After that, the trio returned to Gebhardt's home, where they disposed of the evidence, burning and dumping it in the well. Gebhardt's motivations were driven by a lethal mix of jealousy and racism. Known for his violent tendencies and ties to white supremacist groups, the thought of Mickey being involved with a black man was intolerable to him. This led to a murder so savage that it haunted Spalding County for over 3 decades. One of the major cracks in Gebhardt's defense was his loose tongue. Although no DNA could be recovered from the items found in the well, the discovery aligned perfectly with several witness testimonies.
He said that they had drugged him and gutted him.
They stabbed him 18 to 30 times, drug him up and down the power lines. He got into an argument with a guy that was working on a house and told him that he would kill him like he did the black guy.
However, the defense was quick to question the credibility of these witnesses. They argued that many of the testimonies were unreliable due to the passage of time, and some witnesses had criminal backgrounds. But the prosecution had anticipated this line of defense and countered by calling a key witness who revealed that this inconsistency was part of Gebhardt's plan. Gebhardt intentionally fed different versions of the story to different people to confuse the investigation and cover his tracks. Ultimately, it was Gebhardt's own arrogance that sealed his fate. The jury foreman later revealed that the key to their verdict was Gebhardt's repeated admissions of guilt. They counted at least 17 separate occasions in which Gebhardt had confessed to the killing in one form or another, whether to friends, family members, or even casual acquaintances. On June 26, 2018, Frankie Gebhardt was convicted of malice murder, felony murder, aggravated battery, aggravated assault, and concealing the death of another. After more than 3 decades, justice for Timothy Coggins was finally served.
In the Superior Court of Spalding County, State of Georgia versus William Franklin Gebhardt, defendant, criminal action number 18R105A. Having considered whether the state has proven each element of the following offenses, we, the jury, unanimously find as follows. Count 1, malice murder, guilty. Count 2, felony murder, guilty. Count 3, aggravated battery, guilty. Count 4, aggravated assault, guilty. Count 5, concealing the death of another, guilty. Signed this 26th day of June 2008.
Frankie Gebhardt was sentenced to life in prison, with an additional 30 years tacked on for his heinous crimes. During the sentencing, the judge looked Gebhardt in the eye and delivered a chilling message. Hopefully, sir, you've stabbed your last victim.
Mr. Gebhardt, the jury having found you guilty of counts 1 through 5, I sentence you as follows. Count 1 is that you will serve life in prison. Count 2 will merge into count 1. On count 3, you will serve 20 years in prison consecutive to count 1. Count 4 will merge into counts 2 and 1. And in count 5, you will serve 10 years in prison consecutive to counts 1 and 3. And hopefully, sir, you have stabbed your last victim.
Gebhardt now resides at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification State Prison in Butts County, where he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. In August 2018, Bill Moore Sr. struck a deal to avoid trial by pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter and concealing the death of Timothy Coggins. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with an additional 10 years of probation. Moore was housed at the Augusta State Medical Prison until his death in October 2021, marking the end of a dark chapter in his life. Sandra Bunn, her son Lamar Bunn, and Gregory Huffman, who had been charged with obstructing justice, each posted bail. Sandra and Lamar were released on a $700 bond each, while Huffman posted a $35,000 bond. Since 2018, there has been little news on the legal fates of the three, and their charges remain unresolved, with no updates on their whereabouts. After the trial, the district attorney admitted the hard truth.
Our hardest case I've ever had. We knew going into it that evidence was missing and that our characters our witnesses had colorful pasts. We took that head on, we owned it, and I think the outcome of the case speaks volumes about not only this community, but law enforcement in this community, and the fact that times are changing and times can change.
Throughout the trials, members of both the Coggins and Moore families tearfully apologized to the Coggins family for the murder. In a poignant display of grace, Talisa Coggins, Timothy's sister, wiped away their tears and forgave them. She said, "After all the stuff that Black people have endured from slavery up until now, we still are a forgiving people." Talisa and her family finally could place a headstone on Timothy's grave without the threat of violence or desecration. The inscription read simply, "Gone but never forgotten." Those words captured the essence of the Coggins family's journey, a tribute to their resilience, their love for Timothy, and their determination to see his story told. What do you think? What could have been done differently to bring justice sooner? Feel free to share in the comments. If there's a case you'd like us to cover, let us know. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, justice requires not just truth, but action.